This is quite interesting because when you look back, the average rents achieved in Fife over the last 5 years, from 2021 to the end of 2025, a clear pattern actually emerges. Fife particularly saw an extraordinary growth in rents as the market experienced a period of exceptional pressure post-pandemic. Yet, in the last 12 months, it's now settling at something far more reassuring. That distinction actually matters. After several years in which Fife rents actually rose sharply and competition among tenants was intense, 2025 actually represented a shift towards balance. For many local tenants, that brings a welcome relief, I would imagine. And for landlords, it brings a different set of opportunities, I would say, provided expectations are adjusted and decisions are actually grounded in reality rather than actually in headlines. We all get carried away with headlines, don't we? So let us look at the figures for the last 5 years in rent in Fife compared to them against the national figures. Well, in 2021, the average rent in Fife was £762. As 2022 came along, it went up to 809, and then 2023 it was 859. 2024 was £1,005, and 2025 was £1,031. That is an astronomical rise of 35.3% in 5 years. Now, you could be at this point going, this is ridiculous, that's crazy. But did you realize, though, that inflation in that time as well was 25.4%? So, yes, it is above inflation quite significantly, but inflation has to be taken into account as well. Plus the fact when you look at rent as a proportion to your salary, if your salary, which average salaries had gone up by 25% in that period as well, if your average salary is going up 25% and you're only taking 25% of that towards your rent, then you've still got a significant amount of money there in terms of what you've got. Think about that, work that out. Now, set against the national, though, let's look at how it was with the national right across the whole of Britain. 2021 was 1,390. That was the average in 2021 as opposed to 762 in Fife. That's almost half or double when you look at double the UK or double Fife what the UK was. 2022 was 1,549, 2023 1,723, 2024 1,813, and 2025 1,838. So it's a rise of 32.2% in 5 years. Again, I remind you, salaries 25% up, inflation 25.4%. So when you strip that out, it's a wee bit of a different picture. Yes, it is a bigger return on inflation, but yet most retail prices as well, in terms of high street, some businesses are like that as well. But what it clearly shows, remember, is that while rents in Fife have risen significantly since 2021, the pace of growth actually is moderating in the last 12 months. Remember what I just said there. In the last 12 months, it's gone from 1,005 to 1,031. When you work that out, that's a 2.6% increase. 2.6%. Inflation just now is running at just over 3%. So we're now getting into the realms of, is inflation going to take over and rents are going to stabilize and balance off to make it, and that will be absorbed over a period of time. Therefore, stabilization, balance, and more evenness is coming into the market in Fife overall. But why is the Fife rental market, why is it cooled without actually going cold overall? Well, let me just explain. After years of intense pressure, conditions have actually eased. If you look away back to 2006 and compare in the last 20 years, you get a totally different picture. Because from 2006 to 2020 or 2021, the price of inflation actually outstripped the price of rents going up overall. That is an interesting story. So when you look at an isolation in the last 5 years, it's gone up. So is it the fact that it's actually catching up with where it was before? Competition between tenants, though, is lower, and supply is improved, and thus rent has actually slowed in the last year. Uh, New lets nationally, annual rent inflation is now running at 1.4%, as I said, in the last year, and the Fife area was 2.6%. This is the slowest pace seen in 7 years. Average rents nationally sit at 1,838, rising at around a third of the pace of wages, currently at 4.6%. And that's an important point. This signals that rents are no longer racing ahead of incomes, helping stabilise tenancies and reduce the churn overall. Now, the reasons behind this shift are structural rather than actually temporary. Tenant demand is down by roughly a fifth compared to the last year. According to Zoopla anyway, net migration has fallen sharply from the exceptional levels it's seen earlier in the decade, easing one of the biggest drivers of rental pressure. At the same time, improved mortgage availability has enabled more renters overall to enter home ownership, releasing additional rental stock back into the market and therefore curtailing demand with a bit more supply. This is not a market losing momentum, though. It's a market regaining equilibrium overall. So what does supply look like in Fife year by year, if we look at that? And this will give you a better picture of what I mean. So supply is the other half of the equation. Many landlords actually mislead the local picture overall. So looking at the number of rental homes in the Fife market since then, well, the new listings in Fife in 2021 for properties coming onto the market for rent are 2,427. 2022, 2,252. 1,929 in 2023, 2024, 1,909, and 2025, 2,049. So literally, it has the supply has actually begun to drop since 2021, therefore increasing demand as well, with affordability levels, has led to people actually rushing towards that. Hence the reason the amount of demand has actually increased and rent has actually gone up to curtail that. Supply and demand. You put more money into something, you put more demand into something, it causes inflationary pressure overall if the limited supply is there. But compare that with the national trend. When we look at the whole of the UK, this is a completely different picture. We're talking about millions here. 1,353,000 in 2021, 1,261,100, 1,243,000, 1,240,000, 1,356,000 in 2025. So it's almost coming to stabilise to what it was in 2021. What becomes apparent, though, in this supply has improved locally over the last year or so, broadly in line with the national patterns, but without overshooting demand overall. This is a crucial distinction. Now, Fife has not suddenly become oversupplied. It's simply moved away from the severe shortage of conditions in 2023 and 2024. Why is this good for Fife tenants? And sensible news for landlords as well. Well, for Fife tenants, for example, the benefits are obvious. More choice, fewer bidding wars, and less pressure to make rushed decisions overall. Now, that leads to a longer, more stable tenancies and better outcomes on both sides. For Fife landlords, well, it's my opinion that the opportunity lies in one's shifting focus. The most successful landlords are rarely those who chase the maximum headline rent every single year. They're the ones who prioritise a balance between occupancy, tenant quality, and long-term income without the hassle. Let me explain on a personal level. My average rent in the last my average rent is actually sits at £583 a month across my stock. Yes, 583. When we're talking about it's up to thousands, I am almost half of what the average rent is in Fife, where my average rent is right across my stock. Now, that is 36% below inflation, if I took that into account. So I'm 36%. It should really be 750 if I took inflation into account, but I'm 36% below. So think about that. Some landlords are below and they play the long game like myself. So this is all about long game when it comes down to it. In a calmer Fife rental market, pricing accurately matters more than pricing aggressively. It's not about the highest rent you can achieve. It's about the longest term of tenancy you can get and the better outcome overall for both parties. It's creating a win-win situation where you get an adequate return on investment and the tenant gets a proper wind and water type property, fit for human habitation, and is really good condition. Overstretching on rent is more likely to result in void periods. That's something as a landlord you should not have. A void period could be anything from 1 month to 2 months to 3 months. Now, void, your rent is wiped out completely when you've not got somebody occupied, but you're still paying your mortgage if you've got it. You're still paying, you then end up taking over council tax. Sometimes you get an exemption short term, but maybe not longer term if you have to do that. You then lose a tenant. You then have to pay a finder's fee, or you have to spend all that time trying to find another tenant. And you have to then put them through referencing, which costs money as well. You then have to pay the utility bills while that's happening at the same time. So think about that. There's a huge argument here that net margin or net yield instead of gross yield and occupancy rate are some of the two key indicators you should focus on. The longer you have someone paying in a property, the longer it's looked after, the less costs you're taking on board, the happier everybody is. Sometimes when you have void periods and you overstretch the rent, it erodes returns faster for that reason. And a modest increase improves them or attracts a certain type of tenant that might not be as reliable in paying the rent or keeping the property in good condition. That's what could happen sometimes. So why does stable prices strengthen the investment case in Fife buy-to-let properties and the buy-to-let properties overall? Well, another factor often overlooked is house price stability. A stable sales market in Fife makes it easier for landlords to plan whether that is in buying, refinancing, or rebalancing a portfolio. Look at how many landlords or how many investors or how many developers went to the wall when the house price crash came in 2008. 20% wiped off. They had based all their lending and all their gearing, their loan to value, what they're lending against the value of the property, based on that. And when it dropped 20%, the bank then said, "We need you to repay that 20% to us because you're at the top." This actually takes me on to another show, which I'll do soon, about a decision chart. Whether you should be exiting the market, whether you should be actually reviewing the market, your market position, or whether you should actually be staying and doubling down in the buy-to-let market overall, right across Scotland. But that'll be another show. When prices are not swinging wildly, I would say, investors can assess opportunities based on fundamentals rather than actually speculation. Yield, tenant demand, and running costs come back to the front. For landlords considering entering or expanding in Fife, that stability actually reduces risk and supports a more confident decision making. I am a big fan of interest-only 5-year fixed rate deals because you know where you stand. You've got stability. You know your rent and you know your costs, your outgoings, and it's fixed for 5 years. So you have that margin to use. Whereas if you think that interest rates are going to drop and they end up increasing, yeah, that makes it a bit more difficult for you. There's no leeway there. So what professional approach would you take in 2026 then? Now we're in there and beyond. Well, as the Fife rental market actually normalises and more professional approach becomes essential overall. Properties that are well presented and well maintained and sensibly priced, continue to let well in a timely manner. Clear communication about rent reviews helps maintain trust overall. Landlords who understand the local data, rather than relying on national headlines, are better placed to make informed decisions. Now, I'll come back to saying I'm 36% below inflation on my rents. If I need to increase, do you think I've got a margin to do that? But do you think the tenant's happy sitting in the property at a lower rent level? Do you think they'll stay with me longer? Do you think they'll look after the property? Do you think they'll value it more because it'll be dearer to move somewhere else? That's the important decisions that you take. Understanding local data rather than actually getting carried away with the national headlines on the scarcity and the mass and all the rest of it, all these different things that happen. It's BS. Let's just be honest about it. This is also a market that really rewards compliance and actually good management overall. As standard rise across the sector, and with the new rental legislation already introduced, and the Housing Act will be coming in later this year as law, it's so important to make sure you comply with it in order to make it easier and a smoother transition for you, rather than actually finding at the last minute you've got to comply with something. Looking back on the rent data for 2021 and 2025 to 2025, the long-term trend remains actually quite positive. So what has changed the pace? I would say. So what has changed is actually the pace, not the principle. For Fife landlords, 2025 marks a return to the market and rewards patience and preparation, but 2026 is a better opportunity. More realism's involved. Tenants benefit from greater fairness and choice, and landlords benefit from stability, predictability, and the ability to build sustainable income over the long term. This is a long-term investment. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. So stop listening to the furus, aka the fake gurus. In short, though, to wind up here and come to a conclusion, a calmer rental market is not something to fear. And for those taking that long-term view in Fife, or even right across Scotland, it may well be exactly the environment in which sensible decisions deliver the best results overall. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Till next time, I'm Jim Parker for Fife Properties TV.